welcome Michael. Now, Michael Yankas is a very long-term friend of ours and is a very renowned, it's also kind of a transcendental meditation teacher. He has many qualifications. Not only is a meditation teacher, he is also a wonderful artist, and he is the current director for many years for the Transcendental Meditation Center into, initially it was Palo Alto and now Silicon Valley. So he received many awards. He makes stunning graphics and newsletters. So a lot of wonderful gifts. But more than anything, he's a wonderful person, very knowledgeable and very humble and very disciplined into things. So he's perfect companion for us to be on this call to share this session on the behavioral mental health and impact of different things like consciousness and spirituality and all those, how to address them for us, for our individual gains. And when we meditate, it not just is helpful for us as an individual, but it also has an impact onto a wider spectrum, onto the environment, onto the social level. So he has a lot to share, variety of things, and feel free to communicate, ask questions, and that way we can make it really interesting and interactive for everyone. So again, welcome, Michael. Thanks for joining us, and it's all yours now.
Thank you, Dr. Sachin Deshmukh and Somnath. Very grateful to be a guest on your program. We have had a few very wonderful events at the Indian Community Center, very big events, and we've been very fortunate to have this relationship. What I wanted to talk about tonight is the relationship of consciousness, spirituality, and health. And just kind of share with you perhaps a new way of looking at it that merges ancient Vedic yoga knowledge with modern concepts and modern terminology. And it centers on understanding consciousness, which we generally appreciate in terms of what we are conscious of. So what that means is, if I'm thinking, I'm conscious of what I think about. If I'm analyzing something, I'm conscious that I'm analyzing. If I am having sensory experience, if I'm watching a movie, listening to music, eating a meal, I am conscious of watching, listening, tasting. And if I'm active physically, walking, running, driving, I'm conscious of that activity. So generally, we evaluate our consciousness in terms of the quality of our thought, perception, and action, which is the common appreciation of consciousness. What most people don't fully appreciate is that we can experience consciousness in its fundamental state as well. Just as you can listen to music, you can more deeply experience the underlying nature of consciousness that is empowering the capacity to listen or see or think or act. And in that regard, in the ancient Vedic tradition of knowledge, there's a very beautiful definition of the three fundamental qualities of consciousness itself in its fundamental state. And this definition comes from a body of literature called the Upanishads. And I'm a teacher of the Transcendental Meditation technique taught by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And when Maharishi was training teachers of Transcendental Meditation, he very often referred to this definition because it's very simple yet clear, and it provides us with very deep insights that are important in terms of how we can actually experience these qualities in their fundamental state. Now, in the Upanishads, consciousness is defined with three terms in Sanskrit, which is the language of the Vedic tradition. These terms are Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Now, of course, those of you who are from India, you have heard this description probably many times in the course of your life. Sat, Chit, Ananda. There is even a very famous yogi who had that title. But let's look at the meaning. Maharishi explained that the term Sat means that your consciousness in its fundamental state, and we will define fundamental state as meaning it is separate from and yet connected to any of the active values of thinking, so mental activity, intellectual activity, perceptual activity has its basis in consciousness, but consciousness itself is separate from that activity, and it derives its continuity and stability by virtue of it being completely silent and non-active. Because consciousness itself is silent and non-active, it doesn't interfere with the active experience. Rather, it is the basis. Because it is non-active, it's non-changing and therefore non-variable. And this means consciousness is profoundly consistent and stable. Now, again, we notice this by our own experience. Our thoughts change, our emotions change, our perceptions change, but uniquely, consciousness is always consciousness. And in its fundamental state, it is silent and non-active. But it is not the non-activity of sleep because it's consciousness. And the second term qualifies the silence as silent awareness or intelligence. So Sat, silent, non-active, stable, non-variable. Chit, pure intelligence, pure awareness. Pure meaning it is intelligent in its own state. And that empowers you, if you look around the room that you're in, to be quietly, intelligently aware of whatever you see or whatever you hear, and so forth. You are empowered to that effect purely by your consciousness. However, your consciousness does have a natural relationship to the physiology. And if the physiology is deeply tired, then the clarity of our consciousness is diminished. If we're well rested, the clarity of our consciousness is enhanced. Now, the third quality of consciousness, Ananda, also relates to the silence. It takes it a step further. Because consciousness is silent and non-active, experientially, whenever the typical ongoing dynamism of thought, perception, intellectual analysis, emotional variance, when that activity settles into the non-active silence of pure consciousness, and this is indicated in the Yoga Sutras themselves, because the very second sutra explains that the state of yoga occurs with a cessation of thinking. So when you are in a deep yogic meditative state, thinking subsides and you experience the silent calm of your own consciousness, which, being completely non-active, means that you are now in the deepest state of inner peace possible. And that experience is deeply pleasant, and it is referred to as bliss. Very quiet, comfortable, self-established, self-aware bliss. And these are the three fundamental qualities of consciousness. Now, the challenge in meditation and yoga has always been, how do we transcend thinking? Because one can sit down and that reduces physical activity, and you can close your eyes and that will reduce sensory activity significantly, because the visual sense is by far the most active and complex. Visually, your brain physiology in conjunction with your optical nerves and your consciousness is generating every minute detail of everything that you see. And so that's quite a lot of information and processing for the brain. With the eyes closed, there's significantly less activity visually, and that means sensory. So sensory activity is reduced, and the dominant sense shifts to inner auditory, which is the realm of our thinking, because every thought is a sound. The sound of each individual word that you think, and you have, through your intellect, memorized the meaning of the sounds of that language, and your brain is organizing the sequence of the thoughts through memory, appropriate language structure, and the meaning of the words. Psychology Today magazine referred to an article, a study actually, on thinking, and that study discovered that quantifiably every human being thinks something like 50,000 thoughts a day. Silicon Valley, you may have to square that number. But the point is that all of that thought energy is coming from the silent intelligence of your consciousness. Now, the challenge has been, how do you transcend thought? And the insights that Maharishi brought to this was, firstly, it cannot be done through effort, because any form of effort increases activity, and you will not enter a state of non-active silence by increasing activity. So Maharishi's teaching of the TM technique is a beautifully articulated knowledge of how to change the dynamics of thinking so the mind can settle. And Maharishi pointed out that once the mind is settling, this means the flow of thought is moving inwards towards the ananda, peacefulness of your own consciousness, and effort and control are not needed because your mind always orients to inner happiness naturally. By that, I mean, if you're listening to music that you enjoy, it does not require effort. So in our active life, we use effort, focus, control. That's how we achieve things, because we have to create something. If you're going to start a business, it's not going to create itself. You have to put effort. But effort is not part of meditation, because the purpose of meditation is to transcend activity, and there's nothing to build because consciousness pre-exists. And this pre-existent depth of intelligence, which we call consciousness in modern terminology, is what was referred to in spiritual terminology in earlier generations of knowledge. Spiritual has always meant life enhancing, the better quality of the person, peacefulness, and the ability to improve things. This has been the nature of spirituality. And the essence of our spiritual life has always been defined as being eternal. For something to be eternal, it cannot be changing. Now, consciousness fits that characteristic directly. It is silent, non-active, non-changing, life-enhancing. It is nothing but intelligence in its pure quality. But even though consciousness is our definition for the source of our intelligence, mentally and emotionally and perceptually, when we look around in the world we live in, it is obvious that there is intelligence literally in everything. So if you look at a beautiful flower, where did the intelligence that dictated the growth of the flower seed to stem, to petals, to bud, to the development of the flower, the smell, the fragrance, where did all of that intelligence come from? Here again, we can analyze, and as we go deeper into reality, we will note that it is all linked levels of intelligence. At a deeper level, every aspect of the flower is made of cells. Each cell has its own structural integrity that is highly intelligent in form. And there's also a quality of the intelligence that combines cells together to form the different densities and colors and so forth of the flower. So where does all of that intelligence come from? Now, in ancient times, it came from God. But God doesn't necessarily have to be understood as a person, but rather a creative source of life. And, if we look at the structure of a human being, our brain is very complex and it empowers us within human limitations. But think of how big the brain would have to be to have created the entire expanded galactic universe. It's beyond comprehension. So it can't possibly be an individual person, but it can be a field of intelligence that is stable eternal, and all-pervading. And this is what modern science is concluding. They have found that the intelligence of the cells come from molecules. Molecules are another level of intelligence. And by the way, when I say intelligence in the cellular or molecular level, I'm not saying that the cells or molecules think, but they are very intelligent structures of reality in a physical quality, physical cellular level, physical molecular level. And then as you go deeper, atomic, subatomic, high energy particles. Particles are made of very minute waves of energy. And ultimately, in the most advanced theory of physics, all of this energy comes from a singular, infinite, completely abstract, non-changing, interconnected field of pure intelligence called the unified field. And from a physics point of view, the unified field is the essence of everything that exists at all times. And it is allowing for not only the creation, but the evolution and changing values of life that exist everywhere also. And that description was originally the spiritual definition of God. God is the essence of everything. He or she is eternal. But the he or she quality is inherent quality in the unified field. Some of the elements of nature are more feminine, some are more masculine, some are strong, some are very gentle, but they're very consistent. And as we've sent machinery and even people to the moon and then machinery to Mars, the structure of the moon and Mars is made of the same atoms and molecules and so forth. And we're assuming this is true throughout the entire expanded universe. Now, the most advanced theories of physics are simultaneously concluding that the unified field, therefore, if it's the essence of everything, it is not just the essence of the world that we live in, but it is the essence of our mind. We call the essence of the mind consciousness, but consciousness is actually another term for the unified field, as expressed in the empowering capacity of intelligence at the basis of our mental, emotional, and physical activities. Now, this experience of consciousness, which is very scientific and yet very spiritual, has very beautiful health advantages. Now, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali describes the effect of experiencing the non-active state of the mind or pure consciousness as being life-enhancing and liberating. But Somnath, I would like to show that graphic of levels of rest. And this graphic shows what happens during a 20-minute TM session. And this was published in Science magazine. It was a study titled Physiological Effects of Transcendental Meditation. And it started at UCLA Medical School and it was completed at Harvard Medical School. This study shocked the scientific community, and it has led to what is now over 450 published research studies on the mind and physiological benefits of the practice of TM. Now, I like to point out that if you had a product and you had 50 published research studies validating a health significance, that would be very, very powerful. 450 published studies puts the universal effect for health of the TM program in a very, very unique status. And this is why South Asian Heart Center, for instance, has included a referral for their participants when they learn about health education and how to prevent heart disease, particularly, and diabetes. They recommend that you explore the practice of TM because it will help you manage stress in very unique ways. And this is directly related to the mind when it shifts from active thinking into quieter values in the direction of pure consciousness, which is silent and non-active. It elicits an immediate change in metabolism. And in the Yoga Sutras, this is called samadhi. It is a state of least activity in the mind, and the metabolism reflects it. When you sleep at night, it takes 5.5 hours for metabolism to enter the deepest state of rest. This may generally result in an 8% reduction in metabolism with an unconscious, unaware, inert state of mind. TM is not done for 8 hours. We recommend 20 minutes. And during 20 minutes, this study noted that meditators were experiencing a 16% reduction in metabolism in less than 10 minutes. And this was a very shocking finding, not only by virtue of the fact that how could a mental technique with no instructions regarding regulating or altering breath patterns result in a spontaneous 16% reduction in metabolism in less than 10 minutes, meaning physically you're more asleep than sleep, and yet the meditators were awake. The EEG pattern showed a wakeful, calm state of mind. And this is why the practice of yoga and meditation holistically can really support your overall mind-body health. Now, there are 8 aspects to yoga. Many of you will know, others will not know the 8 aspects. In Sanskrit, they are yama, niyama, asana, which is the physical postures, pranayam, the breathing technique, and then pratyahara, which relates to the sensory state of experience, dharana, mental, dhyan, deepest quality of intellect, and then that expands into samadhi. And the experience of samadhi is profoundly health-giving, but it needs to be complemented by other good habits. And these other good habits for health are, because awareness is linked to fatigue and stress, meaning if you're fatigued and stressed, it diminishes. It's important to have a lifestyle where you allow, along with your yoga practice and your meditation practice, adequate hours for sleeping. And part of the reason is you need, according to South Asian Heart Center, 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night. Why? Because it takes 5.5 to get to the deepest level. And then you have more active dream cycles. Your metabolism rises a bit, and then gradually you wake up out of your dreams. The dreams you are having are the experience of the stress of your active life being processed out. And it's very important that you get deep sleep and you have dream cycles, because that relationship is what results in you feeling better in the morning. People who only allow themselves to get 4 hours, 5 hours, maybe 6 hours of sleep, you can do that for a while, but gradually the lack of extended deepest state will show itself, and it shows itself with poor sleep quality because you have so much built up fatigue and stress. You're now having more active dream cycles, and you're never really getting to stage 4 deep sleep. And then people find that they're waking up in the middle of the night repeatedly. They have interrupted sleep, and it becomes a vicious cycle. You can also support sleep by getting to bed by 10 p.m. Because if you stay up to 11 p.m., there is a quality of dynamism in nature that is defined in Ayurveda healthcare as an enhanced pitta quality. Pitta means heat and dynamism. During the daytime, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., that is the hottest part of the day. And that's a good time to have lunch, because that hotter quality, that dynamism, will support your body assimilating and digesting well the food that you eat. But if you stay up in the evening, you want to be asleep during 10 and 2, because that pitta period repeats, and you want that dynamism and heat to help your body recover from the activity of the day. If you stay awake past 10, by 11, that pitta quality will give you a second wind. And you'll find that you were tired around 9 and tired about 10, but at 11 o'clock, now you have a second wind and you have more mental energy. But instead of that energy going to rejuvenate you, you're expending your energy further. And then you find it's 1 p.m. and now you're really tired. And that habit becomes really hard to break. But these are the principles of consciousness and health, just touching on it, that yoga and Ayurveda, which are complementary aspects of the yoga tradition, offer you for both the enhancement of consciousness, the enhancement of spirituality, and the enhancement of health. So this graphic uses an analogy of consciousness being like the depth of calmness in the ocean. And then up here would be the surface of the ocean, and there may be waves of activity. And the bubbles represent the thought process emerging as a very faint impulse in the mind, like a bubble rising to the surface of the water. And then when it reaches that more active conscious thinking level, thought is clear, and then you can project it into activity. Now, wakeful, focused thinking and action during the day promotes dynamism. And this means your heart is active, your muscles are active, physiology is active, and all of that activity disallows the possibility of experiencing the calm underlying non-active state of pure consciousness. Now, mindfulness or contemplative experience both promote introspection, and the active value of the brain is typically in a beta or gamma style of functioning. But even though you're more introspective during mindfulness or contemplative experience, the brain also stays in beta or gamma, or it may shift into a theta quality, which is a very quiet, creative mode or dreamy-like state. But because mindfulness and contemplative, your intellect is active on the meaning of the words. If your mind is analyzing, you stay in a waking state. If you're in a focused style, like focusing on your breath or focusing on holding a particular position or something, then your mind also stays in a waking state. These are beneficial programs. They help people become more internalized, but they generally do not produce a deeper state of metabolic rest, even as deep as sleep. And the TM technique, which transcends all mental activity, is unique in producing that depth. And research has found that brain function shifts into an alpha-1 category, which is very calm, but still wakeful. And the brain also holistically integrates during TM, which means if you look at the right hemisphere in comparison to the left hemisphere in the frontal cortex, in focused activity, they'll typically be diversified. The rhythm will be slightly different left to right, or frontal to central, central to occipital, and so forth. But during TM, the entire brain becomes maximally orderly, to the extent that all of the divergent areas of the brain will show almost an identical EEG rhythm, which means the brain is more integrated, the processing is more integrated, and all of that harmonious brain activity translates as an expanded state of very clear, calm awareness. And regular practice of TM integrates that style of functioning into your active life. Research separate from TM has shown that people with integrated brain function areas tend to be in the higher performance categories of activity. So in the business world, CEO level individuals have more integrated brains than the general population. The same thing with product designers, developers, advanced mathematicians, musicians, and in athletic performance, gold medal winning Olympic athletes have more integration in their brain than their fellow competitors. As an example, Tom Brady, National Football League, 7-time Super Bowl champion quarterback, is a TM practitioner. And people have marveled that at his advanced age, he's in his mid-40s, he's still winning Super Bowls. And one of his secrets is regular practice of TM, the deep rest, reduces the impact of stress and fatigue, and his brain is more highly integrated, which means faster reflex and mind-body coordination is enhanced. And these are the values of yoga. And then you can support that with Ayurveda for understanding the principles of diet and daily routine, and then fitness programs to stay strong, because if you are strong physically, it does help you mentally and emotionally as well. So these are all of the wonderful factors that come from the Indian heritage. And it's beautiful that in the modern world, the far-ranging implications of this knowledge are now really beginning to be measured, appreciated, and they're empowering people to live happier, healthier lives. Now, personally, I learned TM as a college student in 1967. I was introduced to it by the founder, Maharishi himself, who gave a beautiful lecture on it in Berkeley at that time. It was at the Berkeley Community Theater, which seats less than 4,000 people, but close to 7,000 people showed up for that lecture because Maharishi had taught the Beatles TM in London about a month and a half earlier, and everybody in Berkeley and in San Francisco wanted to know more, and I was one of those people. So I learned it at age 19, and I'll be 74 in February. And I'm very grateful for how this has helped me maintain a good state of health and youthfulness to live a very, what I like to think of as productive and enjoyable life. And that is the impetus for me teaching. I very much enjoy sharing this with students from all backgrounds, and Silicon Valley is the epicenter of international community. So.
Well, Michael, that was wonderful. There are wonderful comments about how many diverse topics you touched and simplified them. And there is also a comment from someone about a lot of science, but how to understand it for the simple people who don't have the background. So we have both wonderful things. So I will just to recap what Michael shared. It's very profound, and he covered many ideas, but very simple ideas when we streamline them. So the first important part is that when you want to rest, you can't be active, and there should be no effort to the technique. That's the first thing. You don't have to necessarily believe anything. You just learn the technique proper, like a technology, and it will take you there automatically, which science proves. Now, third thing is your experience, your own validation of the experience itself is a foundation. Now, we also understand from his description that there is no one formula that what type of technique you choose will provide you the different effect as an outcome. So if you take a maybe car and maybe a train or a airplane and maybe a rocket jet, the ride will be different experience and the time will vary, and the comfort is equally important into the theme. So that's something also to consider when we choose. So what that depicts, that the study done at Mayo Clinic, we have the chart, those who are interested, shows that the different techniques actually create different brain waves and different outcomes based on the type of technique we use. So when we use a technique, then obviously whatever the choice we make, we will have the outcomes based on the technique we use. And then the regularity, as he said, the Ayurveda gives us wonderful foundation. And here with the South Asian Heart Center, have included it into a very wonderful format as MEDS, meditation, exercise, diet, and sleep. So out of that, people do some effort to make some for eating proper and exercise, but the sleep, especially in Silicon Valley, nobody sleeps before midnight or in the morning, right? So we have two questions for you, and they're quite interesting. So one question is from Veena Jain. She says, is artificial consciousness possible?
I'm not an expert in AI, but what I do know is whatever the form of artificial intelligence is directed at, it is coded digitally by the coder. And therefore, the intelligence expressed will be relative to the intelligence of who created that code. Our consciousness, remarkably and beautifully, is directly at one with the underlying intelligence that is the essence of everything that exists in the expanded universe. And that intelligence is coordinating the structure and activity of every single atom in the universe, combining some to form plants, water, air, earth, animals, insects, people, cultures. So we will never achieve a level of intelligence that reflects that universal quality through software coding, in my opinion. It can be highly helpful in terms of creating a very sophisticated machine that could manage things that have become very complex and tedious for most people. But I don't know about self-awareness, which transcends physicality entirely. And we can know it because the essence of our life is it. Whereas the essence of the machine is human-made and more limited. So I don't know. I'm not really qualified to answer that, but that's the kind of speculation that runs through my mind when I have read about AI.
So the next question is quite practical. Somebody, Mr. Tilak, is asking. He's saying that he sleeps around 11:30 and then he seems to wake up around 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning. And then he had a hard time to focus, gather his mind, and try to be resting again peacefully. So do you have any ideas or suggestions on people who go through those?
Yeah, Tilak, going to bed earlier will be very helpful. Now that is going to take time. You won't achieve that shift in one day. Maharishi always advocated that if you have a bad habit or a habit that you want to change and it's long-standing, then you do it in small steps. So go to bed at 11:15 for a week, and then go to bed at 11, and then keep bringing it down. Now, we teach the TM technique to people suffering from PTSD. Typically military veterans who have been in war and they're in a hyperadrenal state and they're in a highly defensive mode, and it's very hard to come out of that in civilian life. They're locked into it from years of being hypervigilant. And people with PTSD have trouble sleeping and so forth. And one of the mechanisms that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi teaches for people with severe stress is if you wake up in the middle of the night and your mind is agitated, don't get up and read books or take a walk or something like that. Just remain lying with your eyes closed and let your mental awareness shift to your body to see if you notice any physical sensation of tension or discomfort in the body. And if you do, you just let your mind feel it in a very innocent way. You don't try to suppress it or ignore it. You just let your awareness feel it. And that process is not TM. It is used when there is an agitated state of psychophysiology because it has the tendency of making the mind lazy and dull. And if you do that without focus, you just let your mind feel the physical discomfort, it will typically allow you to drift back to sleep. Now, if you learn TM, there is significant research that shows TM reduces anxiety, and it also reduces insomnia. Because by meditating in the morning, you complement the quality of sleep that you had, so you're more well rested and you start your day calmer. And then instead of being active for 17 or 18 hours, 16 or 17 hours, you meditate again a second time in the late afternoon or early evening, and that neutralizes stress and fatigue buildup. And now you're calmer. And when you go to sleep at night, you sleep more easily because you're just overall less stressed. You're more relaxed. You're more well rested to start with. And then you'll find that you start to have very good sleep, and then it starts to get into a much better pattern. So meditation can help, but you can use that technique. And Sachin, you can share my email address and let me know how, was it Tilak? Had answered. Yeah. They can get in touch with me, and I can make some other recommendations regarding yoga practice and so forth. Or of course, you can learn TM and that will help, but there are some other steps you can do as well.
That's about it, Michael. Thanks for joining us all the way on this wonderful session. So the last thing, what I want is one takeaway from your thing. What one thing people should do to start their new year with all these ideas, what we discussed?
Well, I will advocate for learning transcendental meditation. It can be learned starting from age 10 years old. It's a very effortless, easy to learn practice. And it has such a holistic range of benefits. I would prioritize it because what we're advocating is the emphasis socially in the world and reasonably is on activity and dynamism. The world is highly focused on dynamism. But in reality, dynamism has its basis in silence. And the silence of the unified field, which is universal, pure intelligence. And that is also the nature of your consciousness. Consciousness is the basis of everything that you think, perceive, and do. So by taking a little time to allow for the experience of silent intelligence, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi explained that that level of nature within your mind has infinite organizing power because it is completely orderly intelligence. It's non-active, it's non-changing. And the more that you experience that, when you re-engage in activity, you will find automatically that the clarity of your mind is transformed and your thinking is automatically more orderly. You will find that you organize your day after your meditation in the most optimal way. And then as you get tired in the afternoon, you reestablish orderliness by taking time for silence. So people think, oh, I've kind of, meditation would interfere with my life too much. But actually, that's totally the wrong perspective. That silence will enhance your life much more than constant activity. Constant activity is sustained by intelligence, and it's re-established by silence. So a more wise lifestyle values silence as much as dynamism. And that's what I'll leave you with.
Very nicely explained. And also, thank you everyone who joined this call